I will kick us off. This is an agenda for a meeting of the Finance Investment Committee of Vallecitos Water District, Monday, August 31st, 2020 at 4 p.m. We'll bypass the notice because we all know it. Items for discussion. Number one is affirmation of AA plus bond rating.
All right, I'm going to let Wes take that item.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening. Welcome to the August 31st, 2020 Finance Committee meeting. As Director Martin mentioned, we have 4 items on the agenda, and the first one is the, I actually got a title, Fitch Surveillance or Affirmation of AA plus bond rating. The second one will be the pump zone analysis, and Mike will actually present that. Then we'll talk about the award of the financial reporting. And finally, we'll go over a cost of service study update. So getting into the Fitch surveillance. First, I'll give you a little background on it, and we'll talk about the press release that was recently issued. We'll talk about key rating drivers, and finally, the conclusion. So background, as you know, during the budget process, we talk a lot about what we need to do to maintain our AA plus rating. We talk about days in cash, we talk about debt service coverage, we talk about reserve levels, management, and willingness to increase rates when necessary. So Fitch actually does a full surveillance of us every 2 years. And this year they began working with us in May of 2020, so shortly before the budget was approved. And we just recently got their press release on August 11, 2020, so we're here to share that with you today. So the press release was actually really good news, and they affirmed our AA plus rating with a stable outlook. And as you can imagine, in today's environment, that is quite the accomplishment. So I'm just going to give a summary of what the press release stated and some of the noted criteria that Fitch had. Some of the things that they noted were that we have a strong and diverse local economy. Household income is 125% of the national average, and unemployment is less than the national average. They also noted that we have a diverse customer base. So our top 10 customers are actually less than 15% of our total operating revenue. And those top 10 customers are stable public entities, HOAs, and multifamily complexes. They noted that we have an independent rate setting authority, the board of directors. And historically, we've had affordable and flexible rates, and we're willing to raise rates when necessary. And we have a strong debt service coverage ratio. So since 2015, we've actually had over 3 times the minimum requirements for the debt service coverage. Finally, we have a strong liquidity position, and that actually hits on the days in cash. So that they've looked at that as favorable for us. So that summarizes their key rating drivers. And in conclusion, I just want to say congratulations to everyone. It's something we work on all the time through the budget process and consistently throughout the year. And it is a major accomplishment and something that we should be proud of.
Yeah, and I think it's really important because as the finance committee members know, in the coming years, we will be considering issuing additional debt. So retaining your high credit rating is very important at this time.
Well, good job to everybody involved.
Excellent job. Can I ask you a question, Wes?
Yes, please.
What's the difference between a AA plus and a AAA plus? What would you have to do?
One of them doesn't exist. No, the AA plus, the max you can get to is a AAA. And really, I talked to Fitch about that. And really, it has to do, for the majority, the biggest part is due to size. So we're almost not a large enough entity to get a AAA. So then I asked him, I said, well, doesn't Leeuwenhoek have a AAA? And they actually said yes, but they had significant reserve levels at the time, and really that helped them get bumped up to AAA. I don't think they have more reserve levels than we do, so I'm not sure the difference there, but that's what the information they gave to me.
Thank you. An excellent job done by all of you guys.
All right, that's it on that item, I believe.
Yep, next item. You guys like my congratulations page here? I put a lot of effort into this. It's a happy page.
Looks good. Who's jumping over the candles?
Yeah,
That's Jack.
So, we got the good news. We got to take the wins when we can get them, right? Celebrate the little things. And this is actually a big thing to celebrate.
You're presenting this to the board, next board meeting?
I don't think we have it on the agenda.
It's not, just from a timing issue, we didn't have it on there, but we'll bring it forward probably at the second meeting in September.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So the next topic is the pump zone analysis, and Mike is actually going to go through this for us.
Okay, so just a little bit of a background. So prior, if you remember back in 2017, the board adopted 3-year pump zone rates. The goal was to get to a 95% revenue recovery. Prior to that board action, the pump zone recovery rate was only about 40%, and we're only talking about electrical SDG&E pass-through costs. It has nothing to do with the capital replacement costs. In May of 2017, the board did approve that 3-year rate structure and using what's called a weighted lift volume approach in order to increase the revenue recovery percentage to about 95%. And the weighted volume lift approach uses a formula that accounts for the volumetric lift of each pump zone. So for example, if a pump zone is 200 feet elevated and we have to lift the water 200 feet, they're going to pay double if someone lives 100 feet higher. So it's an even rate based on the volume of lift. And just, Wes, you're going to go to the next, and then the next one too. So we do have 9 active pump zones. We have 10 pump zones to get all together, but the last pump zone is not active. There's no customers in that. And we do have about 3,000 customers in those pump zones. So the next slide will show the recovery history. So going back to the orange line is, to the left of that is prior to the board action. So before the board took action, we had about a 40% recovery rate. So for every dollar we spend in electricity costs, we got 40 cents back from the customers. Back where the orange line starts in 2017, we brought forward to the board and let you guys know that the recovery rate was at 40%. And the decision at the time was to increase rates to try to achieve a 95% recovery. Wes, if you can advance to the next slide, I think it has the numbers on there. So back in fiscal year 17, 18, 18, 19, and 19, 20, we did increase the pump zone charges by 20%, 22%, and 34% to try to get to the 95%. However, and if you go one more slide, I think it circles it, we're only at a 61% recovery. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I'll get to that in a second. Right now, we're at this fiscal year about 210,000 short of being at that 95% recovery. And I'll stop here for a second just to make sure that makes sense about the 95%, where we are, and the 210,000. Okay, so the next slide, I'll try to explain a little bit of why we're only at 61% and not the 95%. The pump zone, this is the demand in units. These are how many water units are used in the pump zones, in the 9 pump zones total. Pre-drought, in fiscal years 13, 14, 14, 15, we were about 1.1 million units of water sold. Then with the governor's mandate with the drought in 15, 16, and continuing until 16, 17, the demand dropped significantly, about 25% in those 2 years. In 17, 18, we started noticing recovery. So we went back to about pre-drought levels. Those were the numbers that we used to project future demand for the next 3 years. Unfortunately, the demand, as you can see in 18, 19, and 19, 20 decreased again. That is due to the wet weather we had in January and February of 2019 and 2020. We had extremely wet Januaries, Februarys, and I think it even bled into March. So our demand wasn't what we projected. And the unfortunate part with that is about 1/3 of SDG&E's costs are fixed. So what that means, if we have less units of water sold and you divide the SDG&E cost by less units of water, that's going to get you a lower recovery percentage. So like I said, demand dropped by about 25%, and that wasn't what was in our projections. So if we can go to the next slide. So this slide's going to have a lot of numbers on it. So I'm very excited about it. You guys are probably going to be bored to death. But I wanted to kind of show a history of the last 3 years since board took action. So the first line is just the pump zone revenues. Back in 17-18, we brought in about $310,000. It dropped to 302, and that was because of less demand, although we did raise rates significantly that year. In 1920, it went up to 380,000. Again, that was about a 34% revenue increase. So if we can go to the next one, Wes. So the orange line shows the SDG&E cost. So as you can see in 17-18, it was about $606,000. So if you just divide the revenue, the 310 divided by the 606, you get a 51% recovery ratio. And we do that for the next 3 years. So even though we raised rates in 18-19 because the demand dropped significantly, our revenue percentage still stayed at about 51%. This year, we did see a little bit of uptick in demand. When I say this year, fiscal year 19-20, we did see a little bit of uptick in demand. So our percentage increase our recovery went to about 61%. And currently, if we don't do anything with the pump zone rates for fiscal year 2021, we estimate about a 57% recovery. Next, Wes. So this just brings in from the previous slide, just the demand in units, just to show you how the decrease is about 25% demand decrease. Next one. Okay, so what this is gonna try to shows is the revenue per unit. So if we take that 310,000 and we divide it by the 1 million units, we get about a 28 cents per unit revenue. So that basically means that the average customer in the pump zones paid 28 cents per unit of water to pump the water up. We did increase it, like I mentioned, 22% in fiscal year 18-19 and 34% in 19-20, which brought the revenue per unit from 28 cents to 47 cents. Now we were hoping that that would get us close to the 90 to 95% revenue recovery. However, the next slide will show the SDG&E costs during that same period. So back in 17-18, the average cost per unit of water pumped to zones, the SDG&E costs were about 55 cents. Because we were pumping less water in 18-19, the total SDG&E costs went down a little bit, but the cost per unit went up 23%. Actually, I'm going to stop here just to make sure that I'm not confusing you. I know I threw a lot of numbers out there. I just want to make sure you understand that even though the SDG&E costs went down from 606,000, Wes, can you point your pointer? Yeah, 606,000 to the 595,000. If you divide those by the demand units, which is the 1,092,000 for 17-18, and then the 871,000 in 18-19, that's what gets you the 55 cents and the 68 cents. And then just the 68 cents divided by the 55 cents is a 23% increase. I know a lot of numbers, but I just wanted to kind of make sure that you followed along and kind of understood that.
Hey Mike, I got a question.
Sure.
So is that 58 and 60 cents that you were just talking about? Is that per month?
That is per unit of water. So what I do is I take all 12 months of the bills, and which is for the fiscal year 18-19, it was about $600,000. I add up all the bills and then divide them by how many units we lifted to those pump zones. So that's per unit of water.
So you're saying that if a household uses, to keep it easy, if they use 20 units of water during a month, it'll be somewhere like around $11, $12.
Yeah, that would be the cost. The revenue per unit, if you go up, Wes, if you can circle the 35 cents, that's an easy multiplication. They use 20 units of water in 18-19, the average customer would have paid $7. So they paid $7, but it cost us 20 times 68, which is almost $13, $14 you mentioned.
I got you. Okay,
So
well, that makes sense.
Mike,
Okay.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Let's get rid of percentages for a minute. Let's talk dollars and cents here.
Okay.
What is the shortfall 2020, 2021 using your estimates?
Okay,
How much
that'll be on the next. Actually, Wes, if you can go back up a slide, I think we showed right there. So in 2021, if we keep rates just the way they are and don't adjust rates at all, it'd be about $250,000, $255,000.
So
Does
the
that
rate
answer?
increase that we did last time came down to a net loss.
It still was, for last fiscal year, it was still $210,000 for fiscal year 1920. And a lot
Right.
of that, I'll break that 210 down a little bit, but a lot of that is due to the decreased demand that we didn't anticipate. I projected about 1.1 million units of water would be sold in 1920.
So this $255,000 shortfall is for the entire district, or it's just for those 9 pumping stations?
That is for the pump zone customers, so the 3,000 customers.
So obviously what we're doing is everyone's picking that cost up right now.
Correct.
What, hey, Mike, I'm sure there's probably a simple answer to this question, but why is it that when demand is lower, why wouldn't that also equate to less pumping?
Okay, so yes, so I'll give you a hopefully easy numbers. Let's just say it costs $1 per unit of SDG&E, but 25 or 30 cents of that is fixed, and 70 cents of that is variable. So if you drop half, let's just say the demand drops half, that 30 cents is still fixed. That variable drops from 70 cents to 35 cents. Right, so now you have that 30 cents fixed, the 35-cent variable, 65 cents divided by half of the demand. So the math works out. Yeah, unfortunately, that's what happens.
It's like our water bills too. When somebody turns their water off for the month to go on a vacation for a month, they still have the fixed fees.
Right, they're still paying the $38.99.
Yeah.
Or whatever the meter size they have. Or, yes, that is correct.
I got you.
So that just shows that right now we're at 61.3%. It's better than the 40% we were at, but it didn't achieve the 95%. And I do want to caution that's not extremely alarming due to the demand decrease. And most of that demand decrease can be attributed to those wet months. We do show 823,000 for the next fiscal year, or our current fiscal year. That's conservative also because of COVID. So I don't want to say it's going to come back up to 1 million. I want to be ultra conservative when I'm showing you numbers. But I want to, me analyzing this, I want to do the knee-jerk reaction and say, okay, we have to raise rates immediately, fully to get to 95%, because I believe demand will come back once we get back to whatever normal is. So if we can go to the next slide, Wes. Okay, so what I wanted to show on this slide, it's the same exact slide as last time. Wes, if you can circle over the pump zone demand units, the 1,092,000. What I did is just played a what if scenario. What if demand stayed at about $1.1 million? What would that have meant to us? Where would we have been? And if you can toggle back and forth real quick, Wes, if you can go back up one, we were, for the past fiscal year, we were at 61.3% recovery. Had demand stayed constant, go back down, we'd be at about 74% recovery. Now, my projections probably had like 1.15 million in there, but I just wanted to show that if all things being equal in terms of demand and we didn't have the wet months, this is about where we would have been. And that would have been about, I think I show it on the next slide, or I have it in my notes, but it'd be about $150,000 shortfall, not the $250,000 shortfall. So the demand was about, I think I might show on the next slide.
I have a question for you, Mike.
Yes.
Go back to that chart just from my memory. What you're saying is that you believe that the shortfall is really caused because of the difference in use, and COVID has a lot to do with that?
I don't think COVID's going to have a lot to do with it. I think it more wet weather has a lot to do with that. I think COVID's just making.
You think this is short term?
Yes.
And we're going to go back when normal weather hits.
I believe so. I do believe we do need to increase rates a little bit, but not, to get to 95% this fiscal year, we'd have to raise pump zone rates about 66%, which we've done 34% this last year. But I would not recommend a 66% increase.
No,
neither
would I. Neither would
I believe demand will come back.
So prior to 2017-18, we just had everyone pay into this pot. It wasn't separated into pump zones. Is that correct?
Correct. And the rates were not aligned with what zone you lifted, meaning they weren't aligned with how much we had to lift the water.
No, but just to clarify, we did have pump zone charges back then. They were just calculated a different way than we're calculating them right now. And I believe the way we're calculating them right now is the correct way. But 3 years ago, when the board adopted the 3-year rate increases, we made 2 critical assumptions and forecasts. One is that water sales would continue to increase from that 1.1 million, and we assumed a certain increase in SDG&E rates, which have gone up quicker than we had estimated. So obviously we were off on both estimates, and both were in a direction that was disfavorable to the collection of revenue.
Thank you.
I'll show you just some alternatives. These aren't necessarily recommendations, or just alternatives to show. So if we were to do and try to adjust rates to accomplish a 95% recovery in 1 year, I said it was a 66% rate increase to the pump zones, but remember, that's just a small part of the customer's bill. That 66% really equates to only 3.4% of their total bill. So for the average pump zone customer, it'd be about $7 a month. And what that would do is that would get us to the 95% as soon as we adopted those rates. So, and again, there'd be no projected shortfall in 2021. So the other alternative is to split the difference, do it over a 2-year time period. And so you'd raise rates about, the net effect on the customer's bill would be about 1.7% this fiscal year, which would be about $3.50 a month. And then for the second year, what I would recommend, although it's not a recommendation, the alternative would be, is to come back with when we do the budget and do a full analysis on the pump zone rates. So not to set the second year increase right now. This would allow us to have more data, more demand data, and see if things come back to the normal. So with this option, there'd be about $127,000 shortfall in fiscal year 2021. And the third alternative is to just leave rates where we are. And as we showed on the previous chart, that would be about a $250,000 shortfall for 2021. And there's other alternatives too. I just wanted to show kind of like the 2 bookends and right in the middle, just to give you guys an idea of what the impact on the customer would be. Speaking of which, the next slide will show. Now, I don't want to confuse.
One question.
Yes.
Going back a slide again to number 3. That shortfall, if there were to be a shortfall, is assuming that we don't sell any more water or don't sell, well, because sales could go up. A lot can happen.
Right.
The 2 forecasts we made 3 years ago, both were incorrect. So this could be just as incorrect.
Right. If we were to sell back to the $1.1 million, our shortfall without raising any rates would be probably about 215. I think we actually have it. Go back up one, Wes. Oh, okay. I don't have it, but the shortfall would be about $215,000 if demand were to go back up to like the $1.1 million. So right now it's projected to be 255,000. If demand were to go back to the 1.1 million, it'd be about 205,000.
But your projections are best guess.
Excuse me?
Your projections are best guess, same as they were 3 years ago.
Right.
Thank you.
And
Director Martin, if I can interject real quick, I just noticed that Mr. Hunsaker has joined the meeting and he does have his hand raised. So at the appropriate time, just let me know and I can unmute his mic.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so go one more slide, Wes. So what I want to make sure to differentiate is when we talk about rates, we always talk about the average single family residence using 13 units of water with a 5/8 inch meter. Pump zones, we're not talking about the average 5/8 meter using 13 units. So what I did is I took all 3,000 customers, took all of their bills for a full year and came up with an average for them. So the average customer who lives in a pump zone currently pays about $208 a month. With the full phase in, their bill would go up to about $215 a month, and that's at $7 we talked about. for about a 3.4% increase on their bill. If we were to split the difference, do it over a 2-year period, you click West, their bill would again go from the 208 to 212. That's that $3.53 difference, or 1.7% of their overall bill. And then again, if we did no change, obviously their bill would still stay the same.
That always sounds good. Are you done?
And then I just have one more slide. So this shows currently right now, what I did is this is the recreation of the slide we saw a couple minutes ago to show that we about a $255,000, go back one real quick, Wes, $255,000 shortfall at a 57% recovery if we just kept the rates the same. And then the next slide would show, and we'll toggle back and forth, if we split the difference and put in the 1.7%, I think, increase, the deficit would be about 127,000 and our recovery would be about 76%. And I think that is it. If we can go one more slide, Wes, I think that's all and this just shows a history of the pump zone charges. The fiscal year, the red bordered is where we are now for all the pump zones. And all those rates, as we talked about, are based on the weighted lift volume approach. So again, if someone lifts 200 feet, if we have to lift it 200 feet, they pay twice what if they lift 100 feet pumping. And I think that's the end of what I have. Go one more, and I think it's the question slide. Yeah.
So Director Martin, would you like me to allow
Yes,
Mr.
please do.
Hunsaker?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Mr. Hunsaker, I apologize if you had raised your hand at the previous item. I didn't notice it until this item, so go ahead and make your comment.
Okay, you didn't miss me at all on the first one. I had no questions or comments at that point. I had a couple of questions on this item. One is, if I remember correctly, at the last meeting, one of the major objections was from ag, and the power cost and the new pump zone costs had a serious impact on some of those avocado growers. And I'm wondering if that's still the case. Also, electric power has been going up about 5+% per year for a long, long time. And I heard discussion, a panel, and one of the SDG&E representatives mentioned that 80% of their power costs are on distribution and only 20% is on the power. So this seems to be a rather strange way to calculate the power drain. As far as I know, the power costs ordinarily are not related to pump zones, but are related to the set rates. And why isn't it so many dollars per kilowatt hour rather than some minor adjustment for SDG&E's fixed costs? I don't see the variable cost of the power in that. Thank you.
Does staff have anything to comment on or move along?
Well, I guess I would say we did the electricity rate that we look at, we kind of blend it together. We take their fixed and their variable and put it all together. We show what's reflected in the total bill. When you start talking about per kilowatt hour, SDG&E has time of use rates. We don't know in particular when any customer in a pump zone uses water. So we don't know when that water got lifted to that elevation. So that's very hard for us to do. So with the limited data that we do have, we try to spread the costs in as fair a way as possible. And back in 3 years ago, when we set these, the 3-year rates, we did look at where SDG&E was and where we thought they were going. And I believe the number was 4.75% per year increase. And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike Arthur, I think that reflected our best estimate of both the commodity and the fixed charges. Is that correct? Okay. So the method isn't perfect. I don't think there is a perfect method. And I think what we got caught on is making, multi-year projections at a point in time, and it just highlights the sensitivity of any budget to the assumptions you make within it. That's all I
Okay,
have.
out of curiosity, our new photovoltaic field that we're building up in north part of Twin Oaks, what is that supposed to be saving us a year?
I don't remember the numbers on that. And I don't want to quote something off the top of my head when I don't recall it. We can provide the board with that number.
That'd be a good point of interest to me is where are we seeing some savings on electric
Yep.
to
Okay.
try to offset anything else that we may come up with.
Right.
That's all I have. We can move on.
Okay,
Mike,
next topic. So if we're ready for the next topic, I will discuss the award of financial reporting. So as you may, oops, I went a little too far. As you may recall from the November presentation on the audited financial statements, the district expanded its basic financial statements this year to be a comprehensive annual financial report. And that actually consists of 3 different sections. And I'm going to talk about the sections, or the introductory section, the financial section, and the statistical section. I'll talk about the financial section first, because that is what we call the basic financial statements. And that is actually, that's what the district has always had. And that is the minimum requirement for audited financial statements. So if we look at what's in the financial section, it is made up of the independent auditor's report, management's discussion and analysis, the financial statements themselves, which are the statement of net position, statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position, and the statement of cash flows. And then you have the notes to the financial statements, and finally the required supplementary information. So that's what makes up the basic financial statements, or the minimum requirement for audited financial statements. From there, to get to a comprehensive annual financial report, or a CAFR, you have to add the introductory and the statistical section. So the introductory section, to develop that, you have to first start with a letter of transmittal. And the letter of transmittal gives some background information on the district and talks about the district as a reporting entity. It also talks about economic and demographic conditions, our awards and accomplishments, and next year we'll be adding a new one to that. And then you have to add an organization chart. You have to include a list of principal officials and a service area map of the district. So that's what makes up the introductory section. And then you have to look at the statistical section, and this is really the detailed section of the CAFR. And this is actually made up of 16 different tables which have 10 years of information. So as you can imagine, when you're first developing the statistical section, it takes weeks to prepare, and it's really a team effort to put it all together. So just looking at the statistical section, the first section and tables 1 and 2 is the financial trends section, which talks about the financial performance and well-being of the district. So it's basically 10 years of net position. The next tables 3 through 9, talk about the district's revenue capacity, which is detailed information about revenues and expenses broken down by source for the last 10 years. Tables 10 and 11 talk about our debt capacity, which details our outstanding debt by type and our debt service coverage ratio for the last 10 years. Then you have tables 12 through 14, which talk about our demographic and economic information. That's things such as our assessed valuation, our population information, and our largest employers for the last 10 years. And finally, you have our operating information on tables 15 and 16. And that's our employees by function and our capital assets by type for the last 10 years. So once you put all this together, for 10 years of information and spend all that time, then you have to go through a 79-page checklist just detailing the requirements so that you can apply for the award. And this is what this checklist looks like from the GFOA, and this is a sample page from the checklist. And after putting all that together this year, we actually submitted for the award, and on this, well, it was due by December 31st, 2019. We got it in before that. And it's now August, and we've got the results. So the results of that were, we have been awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for our CAFR for June 30th, 2019. And I just want to say congratulations to everyone. This was a real team effort. And actually, even according to our auditors, it's very difficult to get the award your first time submitting. So again, I get all the good news tonight. And just want to say congratulations. This is another thing that we can be proud of.
Now I know who's jumping over the candles. Great
All of us.
job. That's fantastic. Great job, Wes. And all your staff.
Hey, yeah, good job, guys. And Glenn, is Chris's team going to be putting something out on this?
Oh, you're muted,
You're
Glenn.
muted.
You're muted.
Yes, well, we've talked to Chris. We'll be putting something out. We just didn't want to get too far in front of telling the board and the committee that we received it.
Wow,
Okay, thank you.
that's really great work. Great work by all.
We'll also be getting an actual plaque for it that we'll put in the lobby, and once COVID's over, everybody can take a look at it.
Nice. Good job.
Congratulations.
Okay, Wes,
So-
you can stop sharing your screen.
Yep. Let me get to the,
All right, so the last item we had is just an update on the cost of service study. So the Finance Committee members will recall that during the recent budget adoption back in June, some of the assumptions that went into that budget on the revenue side, we assumed that we would have new rates effective February 1st of 2021, so this coming February. And I believe the budget assumption was about a 3.5% rate increase. It wasn't, the detailed study hadn't been done yet, but our estimates of revenues and expenditures showed that there would be a revenue shortfall and that we would need an average of about 3.5% rate increase. And just as a reminder, the cost of service study does not determine the overall revenue requirements or the revenue increase. That's done in the budgetary level. What the cost of service study does is it determines how to allocate the revenue requirements amongst our customer base. So we have the board several months ago awarded a contract to Vallecitos to help, and they're a firm that does cost of service studies. So they're under contract now, and staff has been meeting with Vallecitos to start the process for the cost of service study. And I just wanted to give the Finance Committee kind of a brief overview of where we're at and where we see us going. And at some point in time, we'll need to probably stop by and check in with the full board. So we have met several times with Vallecitos. Our recommendation is to hold a board workshop on September 9th. It's only in a couple of weeks. And the purpose of that would be solely to talk about the cost of service study, but we wouldn't be talking about numbers so much. What it would be doing is giving the board an opportunity to share what their priorities and fundamental issues to look at would be in the cost of service study. The consultant needs some good general direction. We've tried to help them at the staff level, but we realize the board needs to provide input. So at the meeting on September 9th, assuming it takes place that day, it's a workshop. It would be a workshop. Again, it's not to talk about numbers. It wouldn't be approving anything. It wouldn't be setting any public hearing dates. It's solely to get what I'll call qualitative feedback from the board. So assuming that takes place, the consultant said they would need a couple of months' time to start doing the hard work behind the scenes based on the information they get from the board on September 9th. So giving them a couple of months' time, we would come back to the board probably around November 11th. It's somewhere in the middle of the month of November, and we would present preliminary results to the board and solicit feedback. And basically that would say, hey, we heard you back on September 9th. We factored in what you said were priorities and things we should focus on in this. And here's some preliminary results. And that would probably consist of a couple of different alternatives for the board's consideration. So at that meeting on the 11th, we would be asking the board to react to what we present, probably asking the board to pick an alternative so that we can do the final work on that. And then our tentative schedule shows us coming back to the board on December 2nd, at a board meeting on December 2nd. At that meeting, we would then present the rates that would be proposed that are consistent with the revenue requirement and the overall objectives that we received from the board. Also at that meeting, we would be asking the board to approve the study, the cost of service study, and to basically approve the preliminary rates for noticing purposes. So on December 2nd, we would not be approving rates. We would just be approving the rates for notification purposes. The board is well aware that we have to go through a very rigorous process, the Proposition 218 majority protest process. So at the meeting on the 2nd, we would be asking the board to adopt rates for inclusion in the notification mailer. And the fourth thing we'd want the board to do on December 2nd would be to set a public hearing date. So in the recommended date right now is January 20th. And we picked that date for two reasons. One is it's a regularly scheduled board meeting date. That's a Wednesday. And the second reason is that's the last regularly scheduled meeting date before the February 1st effective date that was the premise of the budget adoption. So assuming the board did those four things on December 2nd, and they were okay with the rates as recommended, staff would finalize the mailer, and by December 4th, which is the Friday following that December 2nd date, we would actually mail that public notice to the public. That initiates a 45-day process. The Prop 218 requirements indicate that an agency looking to change rates would have to give a 45-day notice requirements to the public. And that's about the last day. December 4th would be about the last day that we could give notice and give the public 45 days notice before the January 20th meeting where we actually conduct the public hearing. 45 days from December 4th is actually January 18th. So we would have 45 days plus a couple of days. So we would certainly meet the required noticing period. So then on January 20th, that would be the public hearing date. That's when any member of the public that is interested in the issue could come to a board meeting. If we're still having meetings electronically, they could attend the meeting electronically. They could also submit written protests if they wanted to contest the dates. If the motion passed on January 20th, if there weren't adequate dissenting opinions or votes from the public, then the rate, if the board so chose, they would adopt the rates on January 20th, and they would become effective on February 1. And that would all be consistent with the estimates that were put in the budget adoption. If the rates went into effect on February 1st, they would be reflected on the March 1st dates and beyond. So we usually, you get a bill about 30 days after your usage. So if the rates went into effect February 1, they wouldn't reflect on your bill until March 1. Couple points I'd want to point out here. We're still working with the consultant to make sure that we can meet this timeline. They admit that it's fairly aggressive, but they think we can meet the date. They did say that if we don't have the meeting, the workshop on September 9th, we probably could not meet this timeline. But if we have the workshop on September 9th, they think that we probably could. If there were to be a delay and we couldn't meet that February 1st effective date, our estimate is that every month of delay is about a $50,000 per month loss of revenue over what we assumed in the budget process. And a couple things to think about. If we did delay it a month or 2 months, then we may need to adopt rates that are actually a little bit higher than what's recommended if we wanted to get the same revenue requirement. Alternatively, we would just realize that there's a revenue loss, that we lost out on a couple of months of revenue, and that would come out of reserves or other adjustments to the budget. One slight modification, if we're looking for a week here or there, we could conduct the public hearing at a special meeting date, assuming we can meets all the legal requirements. and that would be on January 27th instead of January 20th. And then we could still meet the February 1st effective date. And then we can delay the mailer by a week, and it would give the consultant and staff a little bit of time. As I mentioned, we're working with the consultant to ensure those deadlines are achievable. And just as a point of reference, if we were to come to the board on December 2nd for kind of the approval to move forward, that is the date that a new board member will be seated. So we have to consider, is that fair to a new board member to be seated on the date that we're initiating a Prop 218 process? So that's all I wanted to share, but I'd certainly like to hear the Finance Committee's thoughts on this issue.
Glenn, let me tell you what I just heard you say. I gleaned parts of it. Is that you're going to recommend a 3.5% increase in the rates. If we don't do that right away, it's going to mean more money. And this is a done deal. And I don't think it's anything but a done deal. The board has not decided that we're going to do increased rates. We might decide to make cuts somewhere else. But that isn't what you just stated. You just stated 3.5%. We're going to guarantee to do that. If we don't do that, it's going to cost us $40,000 a month for every month we delay.
Well, what I thought I said and what I meant to say is that if the board approves the rates at the December 2nd meeting, then we would issue the mailer that starts the public hearing, all predicated on what the board decides to do. And if we don't do it, it will create an incompatibility with what was in the budget documents. That doesn't mean that you can't find savings in other ways, or that other things may be coming in below budget and there may be offsetting savings. But all other things being equal, we did tell the board in the budgetary process that this revenue requirement is predicated on new rates being effective February 1 of 2021. So it's not a done deal. The board still has full authority on how we move forward, both on the timing and the ultimate decision-making process. But we need to make sure that the board understands that there are ramifications for the decisions that we make.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that staff understands there are other ways to save money besides raising rates. And we need to look at all those in detail, especially with COVID and what we've learned from it.
Right.
Anyone else? The only comments I have is, and I remember the conversation during the budget. That's really when is the right time to be really fighting these these costs and making the adjustments during that process. But it is a very aggressive timeline, and as you had indicated, Glenn, and so fingers crossed. But I don't know. I could see there's a lot of opportunity for it to get kind of off track.
Okay. Yeah, we're not looking for any direction specifically from the Finance Committee. Just want to run this general timeline by you, see what thoughts you may have. Still recommending the workshop on September 9th, but depending on what we find out in the pace that the consultant can support, some of the other dates may slide. They may go further into the future.
Okay.
And that's all we had.
Okay. That was the last item on the agenda.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
And I do not see a raised hand from Mr. Hunsaker, so I don't think he wanted to speak on that.
Thank you for attending, Michael Hunsaker. Appreciate it. Thank you, staff. Congratulations on your award. And we'll see you on the 9th.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night,
Hey,
guys.
everybody. Have a good night.
Night.